Good morning. I have 9 o'clock. Hadn't heard the bell yet, but I've got 9 o'clock. A few quick announcements. Need to remember Kevin's mother in our prayers, Sister Haney. Uh, Diane had her defibrillator installed this past week, and the worst part of it was she can't hit him with her left hand, but the worst part of it was he was lost in Birmingham. So sort of reminds you of the old song, Lost on a Clover Leaf for 4 days. And then I also found out that Pansy can now kick Bryant without him chasing her. He had knee replacement surgery Thursday, and I didn't even know he was scheduled. He's doing good. Okay. Miranda, how's your dad after his series of treatments? Okay, but he's making improvements. And we need to keep the conscious, both of them, in our thoughts and our prayers. Anyone else that I missed? I saw that email. So, ooh, that's always tough. Uh, Anyone else? Out in Texas, she was in lived in New Mexico, but in Texas hospital. Yeah. Okay. Brother Cox, would you lead us in a prayer, please? Amen. Brother Jeremy got us down through about verse 9 of chapter 24 Wednesday night. And that section is basically dealing with Balaam and Balak. And we're going to pick up in verse 10 and just sort of scan through it kind of quickly. But by this time, Balak is upset with Balaam because he's not telling him what he wants to hear. And at the very outset, Balaam had said that he was not going to go beyond what God had told him to say. He was going to say that. But Balak is angry. And then if you look at verse 11, he says, "Therefore now flee thou to thy place. I thought to promote thee unto great honor, but lo, the Lord hath kept thee back from honor." Now, if Balaam had said what Balak wanted to hear, he would have put him on a pedestal, put him in a prominent position. But here he said that the Lord had kept thee back. Did the Lord keep Balaam back? Answer, huh? Yes and no. Explain, please. So the way my take on it is just what Brother Clarence said. God had told him what to do. Now, Balaam had a choice. And Balaam had said from the very outset that he was going to go by God's word. So when a person becomes a Christian today, they still have options if something comes up that is not right. They can choose to do the not right, or they can choose to do the right. So I guess I'm a little bit more hardcore, because to me, once you make a commitment, there are no choices anymore. If you choose to become a child of God, that other's not even a consideration anymore. You focus on what you're doing, and that's what Balaam here, he kept focus. Still choices, but you don't, yeah. And then in verse 12 it says, Balaam said unto Balak, spake not also to thy messengers which thou sendest unto me, saying, if Balak would give me his house full of silver and gold, I cannot go beyond the commandment of the Lord to do either good or bad of my own mind, but what the Lord said, that will I do. And that just brings it down to the point of, in essence, answering what Balak said in verse 11. You can give me all your gold, all your silver, but I still belong to the Lord. You're not going to tempt me away from doing what's right. Verse 14, and now behold, I go into my people. Come therefore, and I will advertise thee, or tell thee, what this people shall do to thy people in the latter days. So now he's going to explain to him what the Lord has, the information that he has been given by the Lord, how the people are going to be dealt with. Verse 16 says, he has said, which heard the words of God and knew the knowledge of the Most High, which saw the visions of the Almighty, falling into a trance, but having his eyes open. So this is just one of the methods that was used in the Old Testament for God to talk to individuals. And verse 17, 18, and 19 talks about what's going to happen. When you look at verse 20, it says, and when he looked on Amalek, he took up his parable and said, Amalek was the first of the nations, but his latter end shall be that he perish forever. Couple of questions. What does it mean that Amalek was the first of the nations? And what does it mean then by he shall perish forever? Well, yes, and before that, what happened? If you recall in Samuel, what Saul was told to go and destroy him. So that was their final physical end there. So I find verse 21 sort of interesting. It said, and he looked on the Kenites and took up his parable and said, strong is thy dwelling place, and thou puttest thy nest in a rock. Nevertheless, the Kenites shall be wasted until Asher shall carry thee away captive. Who are the Kenites? Midianites. How do you come up? You're correct, but how do you come up with the Kenites being equal to or being the Mennonites? And who is Jethro? Let me. Moses' father-in-law Jethro was called both a Midianite and a Canaanite, and those are in, one of them is in Exodus chapter 3 and verse 1, and the other is in Judges 1 and verse 16, where Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, was called both. So that's how we come up with them being the Midianites. And then in verse 23, he took up his parable and said, who shall live when God doeth this? And the ships shall come from the coast of Chittim, and shall afflict Asher, and shall afflict Eber, and he shall also perish forever. And Balaam rose up and went and returned to his place, and Balak went his way. So Balaam, in essence, told Balak everything that was going to happen to those people, and then they departed and went their separate ways. Questions or comments then on chapter 24? Yes, sir. Uh, Verse 17 says, I shall see him, but not now. I shall behold him, but not nigh. There shall come a star out of Jacob, and a scepter shall rise out of Israel, and shall smite the corners of Moab, and destroy all the children of Sheth, which is Seth, yeah. Okay. Anything else? Chapter 25. Israel abode in Shittim, and the people began to commit whoredom with the daughters of Moab. Before we look at that one, go back to Exodus chapter 34 and verse 15. Exodus 34 and 15. I'm going to start with verse 13, but ye shall destroy their altars, break their images, and cut down their groves. For thou shalt worship no other God, for the Lord, whose name is jealous, is a jealous God. Lest thou make a covenant with the inhabitants of the land, and they go a whoring after their gods, and do sacrifice unto their gods, and one call thee, and thou eat of his sacrifice. This had been, I guess you could say, forecast, warned against, all the way back in Exodus when they were coming out, that when they went into that new land, that promised land, that they were supposed to drive out all the inhabitants, not have anything to do with them. For what specific reason? They would fall away from God, and told them what would happen. In verse 25, chapter 25 here, verse 1 shows that that is exactly what happened. And verse 2 said, and they called, meaning the daughters of Moab, the people unto the sacrifices of their gods, and the people did eat and bow down to their gods. And Israel joined himself unto Baal Peor, and the anger of the Lord was kindled against Israel. How easy is it for someone to be enticed away from the true God? I know that's an open statement and a broad statement, but how easy is it for someone to be drawn away from the true God? Depends on your faith. What makes your faith the weakest? Temptation or lust or something of that nature. Why do you think that in World War II, Civil War, there were so many brothels? You know the answer. You-
Busy, entertainment, so they would not go elsewhere.
Well, that's a part of it, but have you ever heard the phrase pillow talk? Most of the spies hung around places like that were women because they could entice men to speak when they should have kept silent. So here, it is easy for someone to fall in love or lust and be drawn away. And who has more ability to do that than someone of the opposite sex? Yes, sir. That's true. Uh, in the Civil War, what they call the Civil War, which was actually the war between the states. Let's go to World War One. That's a more vivid example. In World War One, you know what put most of the men out of commission? What kept them off the battlefield? Pardon? Correct. It was not battle wounds, it was STDs. So, yes, sir. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it wasn't just a casual get together. It was, they were drawn into. Now look at verse 4 and look what the penalty is. The Lord said unto Moses, take all the heads of the people and hang them up before the Lord against the sun, that the fierce anger of the Lord may be turned away from Israel. And Moses said unto the judges of Israel, slay ye every one his men that were joined unto Baal Peor. Why do you think they wanted them to put their heads, hung them up before the Lord against the sun? What would that mean? They want to dry them out? Pardon? An example, and how is something an example? By visual, and it's open and public, and it is seen. It's not done in secret. If he was going to put the message out that something needed to be done or else, and show the or else, visual understanding is much better than auditory understanding. You can hear something, but you don't comprehend it as well as if you see something. And in my opinion, that's one of the problems in the United States today with punishments. If somebody is sentenced to death, it takes them 30 years to put them to death. And they do it inside the prison, and it may hit the morning news that someone was put to death overnight, and may not, depending upon what the guy did that deserved it. Public, and I am not for this, don't get me wrong, I am in no way for public flogging and stuff of that nature. But if you can see that there is an immediate consequence to an action, you are less likely to do the action than if nothing's going to happen to me. Wild Wild West had visual, but they also hung a lot of innocent people. Correct. If we pick up in verse 8, Now, all of this is taking place. Moses has instructed them to slay the people that were attached to Baal Peor. All of that was taking place. Verse 6 says that one of the children came and brought unto his brethren a Midianitish woman in the sight of Moses. If we skip down to verse 8, then it says, let's back up to verse 7. When Phinehas, the son of Eleazar, the son of Aaron the priest, saw it, he rose up from among the congregation, took a javelin in his hand, and he went after the man of Israel into the tent and thrust both of them through, the man of Israel and the woman through her belly. So the plague was stayed from the children of Israel. Now, I think there's a connection that we need to understand. If we drop on down to verse 14, it names the people. The name of the Israelite that was slain, even that was slain with the Midianite woman, was Zimri, the son of Shalu, a prince of a chief house among the Simeonites. And the name of the Midianitish woman that was slain was Cosbi, the daughter of Zer. He was head over a people and of a chief house in Midian. So these people were prominent people. They wasn't what we would refer to as the common one down here. They were sort of elevated in their stature. I get those words mixed. Anyway, so when Phinehas, in his zeal, when he went and killed them, then that stopped the plague. That stopped the killing of all of those that had been attached to Baal Peor. Now, in the next chapter, when we get down to numberings, we're going to find out just how important that was. But when we pick up with verse 9, it says, and those that died in the plague were 20 and 4,000. So as Brother Clonch had mentioned back up in verse 1 and 2 here, that it wasn't just something casual. Many had been drawn away into this. It wasn't just by ones and twos. 24,000 were killed because of that transgression. Verse 10 says, the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, Phinehas, the son of Eleazar, the son of Aaron the priest, hath turned my wrath away from the children of Israel, while he was zealous for my sake among them, that I consumed not the children of Israel in my jealousy. And we've seen this before, where Moses interceded and kept God from wiping them out and killing bunches of them. But Phinehas' action stayed the plague then and ended with only 24,000 being killed. Questions or comments to this point? Yeah, I'd give or take 1,000. The general rule that they went by was they would name a number and then the number, then they'd subtract 1,000. So right, and then that they're probably taking away by their tradition, they're taking away the 1,000. So yes, sir. Okay. Either way you go, you got the 24,000, right? Yes. We've already read in verse 14 the names of the people, and verse 15 also. And then in verses 16 through 18, the conclusion of that chapter says, the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, vex the Midianites and smite them, for they vex you with their wiles, wherewith they have beguiled you in the matter of Peor, and in the matter of Cosbi, the daughter of the prince of Midian, their sister, which was slain in the day of the plague for Peor's sake. So God just then tells Moses that they're to go after and do away with the Midianites. Questions or comments? Next chapter is dealing with numbers. Do you recall how many people were numbered in chapter 1 of Numbers? Total number? 603,550. He's going to number them again. Verse 1, and it came to pass after the plague that the Lord spake unto Moses and to Eleazar, the son of Aaron the priest, saying, take the sum of all the congregation of the children of Israel from 20 years old and upward throughout their father's house, all that are able to go to war in Israel. Now, we're not going to number these, but I'm going to summarize them for you. If you compare chapter 1 of Numbers with this chapter and go through family by family, what you're going to find out is that 5 of the tribes decreased in population and 7 of the tribes increased in population. Why would there be that kind of disparity? Robert, Brother Golden just hit it smack dab on the head. If you go back into Numbers chapter 1, Simeon was 59,300. In the plain of Moab, at this numbering, it was 22,200. They were the tribe that lost the most, that decreased the most. And as he pointed out, the previous chapter tells us why. Who was the chief house of the Simeonites? Zimri, that brought the Midianite woman. So apparently when 24,000 were destroyed, most, if not all, would have probably been the Simeonites. And as we go back through and look at Korah and others, when you're comparing the numbers, those that stayed true to God flourished or increased in number, and those that went against God decreased in number. Brother Golden. Yeah, Manasseh was the greatest gain. And what do we read about Manasseh in the previous chapters? Stayed true. So roughly, then that brings it to, in the comparison, that shows you, as I said, those that stayed true increased, flourished, and those that didn't stay true diminished. But in the final numbering, they really hadn't lost that many people. They'd only lost under 2,000 people, because your total number in Numbers chapter 26 is 601,730. Previously, there had been 603,550. So if you do your math, that's 1,800 people. That's the difference. Brother Clunch. If you're wanting to pin it down, verse 51 in chapter 26 is where it gives you the total number. And like I said, we're not going to take the time to read the rest of them. I just sort of summarized there for you. But any questions then through verse 15? Yes, ma'am. Well, that's an excellent point. We know that God can do anything God wants to do, but that makes a real good point that during their travels they didn't have access to them. God could have provided, but in the natural scheme of things, there was a set amount, and even God had to step in for water and food and a few other things. So, anything else? Yes, Brother Golden. Balak. Mm-hmm. Anything else? Okay. After all the numberings and everything takes place, the rest of the chapter, even in, we'll get to some more numberings. We'll get to the Levite numberings. But then when we drop down to verse 63, it says, "These are they that were numbered by Moses and Eleazar the priest, who numbered the children of Israel in the plains of Moab by Jordan near Jericho. But among these there was not a man of them whom Moses and Aaron the priest numbered when they numbered the children of Israel in the wilderness of Sinai." And we're going to find a couple of exceptions here, but on the whole scheme of things, when we look at it, there was not a man of them whom Moses and Aaron the priest numbered when they numbered the children of Israel in the wilderness of Sinai. The wilderness of Sinai was the first numbering in Numbers chapter 1. And who did they number at that point? Men of war, 20 years and up. So from 20 years and upward, those capable of war, those were the ones that were numbered in Numbers chapter 1. In Numbers chapter 26, none of those were alive to be numbered. So now what is being numbered are all of those that were under the age of 20 in chapter 1 and their offspring that had gotten to be over 20 years of age. Right? With the exception of the tribe of Levi, Levi wasn't numbered in chapter 1, and Levi was not numbered with that 601,000 in chapter 26. They were pulled aside because their mission was not war. Their mission was something else. So, okay. At this particular point, I'm going to disagree with you and say there were only 3 left. Aaron had already been killed a couple of chapters before, right? Or not killed, but died a couple of chapters before. Pardon? That's why Eleazar is now the chief. So when we get down to it, for the Lord had said of them, they shall surely die in the wilderness, and there was not a man left of them save Caleb, the son of Jephunneh, and Joshua, the son of Nun. So you have Moses still alive at this point, and you have Caleb and Joshua of the original group that was in Numbers chapter 1. So why were those three left? Because Moses had already aggravated God when he struck the rock, and that's immediately after that is when Aaron was died. So why is Moses still hanging around? I'm sorry? He still has a purpose. God still has a purpose for him until, I won't say immediately before, but adjacent to, that close to him, them going into the promised land, Moses had a purpose. And then in Deuteronomy, Moses goes up and dies, and then Joshua takes over. But why did Caleb and Joshua survive? If we go back to the verses that said none of them over the age, none of those that were numbered in chapter 1 survived, why this exception? Why those two? They of faith. All right, let's back up just a second. Who were they? Let's go back to the spies. How many spies were there? 12. How many of the spies were killed immediately after they came out before the wandering started? 10. Why? They had a negative report. They didn't have faith. Caleb and Joshua were the two that said, let's go get it. We're good to go. They were still focused on God. Why did they have to wander around and lose a whole generation of people? So the 10 that came back with a negative report influenced the majority of those, and so God's punishment or God's justice was that, okay, none of you will go in. Those 20 and under will. And the two that stayed focused on God and true to God. What does the New Testament tell us in many, many spots about who is going to make it into heaven? Who's going to get a crown of life? Speak up a little bit. Those that stay faithful unto death. Another way it's phrased is endure. And what does it tell us about what Christians will go through? They will be persecuted for his name's sake, but those that hang tight, endure, stay till the end, they're the ones that are going to get the reward. Very evident here that Caleb and Joshua stayed focused, stayed true, and they got the reward of not dying in the wilderness and getting into the promised land. I want you to think for just a second. How old was Moses when he died? How old? 120. How old was Aaron when he died? 123. How old was Miriam when she died? 130 plus or minus, right? Think about this. In the verse here that says, none of those that were numbered in chapter 1 is going to be alive and enter the promised land. Some of those were as young as 21, correct? If they're going to number from 20 years old and above, some of them are going to be the minimum age, and some of them are going to be the upper age limit of those capable of war. If we take the ones that were minimum, how long did they wander the wilderness? 38, 39, but after their punishment period, but a total of 40 years. So how were a good majority of those that died? They went into the promised land. They're not 60 years of age. They're 59, 60, 60 of age. The age of the three that we named. So their lifespans, and it depends on which authority you get. Some of them span the average lifespan during this time period to be in the 40s. But by everything you read and the ages of people, I put it and believe other authorities that put it at a much higher range. I don't think Aaron and Moses and Miriam were exceptions. I think that they were more into the norm. So by God saying that all of those are going to die before they enter the promised land, there was intervention going on there. Brother Clonch. Even Moses didn't make it. Only 2 people of the original numbering actually set foot in the promised land. Narrow is the way, and straight is the gate. Absolutely. Questions or comments then through chapter 26? Right. That is more than likely correct, because if you look strictly at the verse, it says those that were, and ones that were the exceptions, Caleb and Joshua, they were focused on God and stayed true. Their mission, their role in all of this, they were not numbered, but what was their role? They were to take care of the worship, take care of the sacrifices. So it's very, very probable. I'll put it that way. I don't think anywhere ever tells us for sure, but I would think that would be probable. Yeah, because during this time period, by the older teaching the younger, when were the younger thought to be step in and be counted as one of the older? And that was around the age of 40. So good points. Good points. Anything else? It is passing the torch, and there were some skirmishes, but who was Moses' general of the army? Joshua. So who's the torch passed to when they start their next phase of conquering? Joshua. Thank y'all so much for your questions, comments, and